I was always sort of the attitude, and usually as an executive, if I'm going to make a wrestling, I got one. You're going to make one, because realistically, I don't believe Vince says he's making Gorgeous George. That's not a commercial movie, in my opinion. It's a commercial movie if you make Quiz Show or Ed Wood, and it's the birth of a medium. If it's about the birth of television, and it's the Farnsworth invention, that's a movie. But I don't believe that's the movie they're going to make. And I think that where this got interesting...
You're saying if you tied Gorgeous George into the birth of television.
Yeah, because he's the first TV star in a certain way. And he was
very much
instrumental to the rise of it. I think that's the interesting story. I don't... Same way that Quiz Show is ultimately about a moment in time. It's not really about Charles Van Doren. He's the thing. I think you got to do that there because, frankly, you're always going to be held to the wrestler. And I think with this project, the idea of doing something that was sort of non-linear, like an American Splendor, that allowed you to go and play, because I lived at New Line during American Splendor and saw
American Splendor was the one that Chris gave me 5 years ago.
Right.
Yeah,
it was.
And ultimately, and obviously, it was a movie that really elevated Paul Giamatti and did so much there. And I just... That made some sense, and I think there's a chance I could through that to do something very fresh and different, which I really think is necessary because you're going to have a strike against you from the jump just by virtue of the fact that people think, well, that was the definitive wrestling movie. I do have to say the best thing about The Wrestler ever, and I will, with all due respect to Ric Flair, who is a nice guy who I would never recommend doing business with, ever. And I'm sure there are many people in litigation with him right now that would agree with that. We had a dinner with him. Shane Riches might have told you this story. Shane and I had dinner with him, and which he probably ran up a wonderful bill of sale. I did not get iced. I got asked. And I remember having a conversation. The Wrestler was just coming out, and boy, oh boy, he could not piss on that thing enough. Oh, it's a disgrace. It's this and this. Oh, there's an opportunity to make some money off of it. Boom, I love it.
Yeah.
And by the way, that was WWE's attitude to a certain level. And I just remember watching the Golden Globes. And Mickey Rourke goes on the red carpet and outs the Jericho negotiation. And I texted Chris and I just said, Mickey Rourke just cost himself the Oscar.
He did.
And he did. He absolutely cost himself the Oscar.
I think so.
Intimating that you were going to get in bed with Vince McMahon, that was the Norbit move. When Eddie Murphy was going to win for Dreamgirls and then Norbit came out, this shit counts in the ads. It's stupid. It's running for homecoming.
I felt the same thing. I felt the same thing as soon as word leaked out that he cost himself.
And not only that, but like you could have capitalized it by keeping it under wraps a little more. And sort of after he does it, after he goes out and does the Oscar, then he goes and does that.
Do it,
and in that way, you have to sort of not mixing the two to where either one of them feels uncomfortable.
You're dealing with a bunch of old voters.
Yeah.
And the old voters, okay, it's the same reason why James Franco and Anne Hathaway are hosting this year. It's a bunch of old people going, we need to get to the kids. And frankly, they know who Hathaway is. I'm not sure they know who Franco is at the level that the town thinks they do. But that's their thinking. And ultimately, these old biddies went there and went, you're not going to disrespect. They hold themselves up in such high regard in the Academy, frankly, foolishly, because based on the numbers and the way they devalued their brand. And they said, you just basically sneered in our faces for honoring you with a chance to come back. And it's when Burt Reynolds got nominated for Boogie Nights.
And then he...
Golden Globes, remember that? Went up and said, I didn't go away, you all went away. Killed himself.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was that Burt had come out publicly talking about what a mistake it was to do the movie.
Well, he done that too, actually.
And that was such a great movie.
Definitive role of his career.
Not just for him, but I mean, I've run into Hotel Rwanda.
Don Cheadle.
Don Cheadle. A couple times, just passed him in the street, and I've never had that character I wanted to ask him about, because I have noticed, and I mentioned this in the book, I talk about a scene I did with Willem Dafoe, and I was like, knowing I was going to do the scene with Dafoe, I could not go up there and ask him about being the Green Goblin.
By the way, professional.
Yeah. And so I said, do you mind if I ask you about a role? And he was a little tentative, and I said, I was wondering how much training you had to do for Triumph of the Spirit, which is where he played a boxer in Auschwitz. Mm-hmm. It's probably not a question he gets very much. So he was very open to talking about it. I asked him about getting into how much character he'd have to get into before a scene for Shadow of the Vampire. And I was like, man, people want to talk about roles as long as it's something they're proud of and it's not been overdone. Like,
in Speed 2, Willem, what was it like with the leeches?
And so that would be like Don Cheadle. I wanted to, if I run into him again, I want to ask about that character.
Right.
In
Buck Swope.
It was okay. I didn't remember the name, but I remember the fact that over the course of an hour and 45 minutes, or 2 hours, may have been a little bit longer, right? 2.5.
Yeah, 2.5.
That you cared about 6 different characters. Like they made an impact, and you were emotionally invested.
They all
in it.
had an arc. They all had a story.
When Buck Swope gets away with the money and then opens up his audio dealership or whatever, you care. You pop for that.
Buck Stereos.
Was that what it was? Super something stereos.
Supersonic
I think, right?
stereos.
And
It's
it
got the
was,
Technotronic 5000. You feel that bass.
Yeah.
When Amber Waves, when she gets the phone call from the kid asking for the woman that nobody knows because it's her real name, like, first of all, that hits home in wrestling, because there's a scene, and I'm really not plugging the book, but there was a scene where I wrestled the guns and it went pretty well, and afterwards he goes, yeah, Josh said this. Josh? Who the hell's Josh?
Save it.
Chris pointed to Alex, your name's Josh? So maybe Josh is Chris.
Josh
I
is
was like,
Chris,
what's your name? And I was like, come to think of it, you can only have this conversation in wrestling where, like, where
porn
is Billy. Yeah, exactly.
Hollywood too. Hollywood too.
But it was heartbreaking because that was the moment she had to bond with the kid, and instead, she was at a party and hey, no, there's no so and so around. Click.
Yeah.
And you knew when that phone hung up that so essentially did her chance to, have any type of relationship with her as a child. But that was an example. Burt Reynolds was a great character. And Dolph Diggler was amazing. That's when I became such a John C. Reilly. I don't call wrestling fans marks, but I can call myself one. I became such a mark for him because he was the guy that put over whatever Dolph Diggler was doing. Even though it was clear that when he's saying, feel my heat.
No, one more beat. Feel my heat.
It was clear to everybody.
There's magic on these tapes, man.
Because you may own these tapes, that's true. There's magic that exists on these tapes.
That's all
of us.
Well, and you talk about his performance in there. Everything he did was an accent to Mark Wahlberg's character. They worked so well together that, you sort of, neither one of them was quite off the rails. They were both sort of helping each other along the way, much in like.
Well, because Chest Rockwell, Reed Rothschild was his character, and then Chest Rockwell was his
partner.
His
character
in the Johnny Y. What was Brock Landers?
Brock Landers.
The best line in that movie is the scene where he's sitting there. He's like, "Yeah, it's not just the best food in L.A. It's excellent." And he goes to the bedroom with the blonde, and she takes his pants off. She goes, "Oh, it's true. You are Brock Landers." It's the greatest thing of all time. That movie really is excellent. If you have not seen that movie. In terms of movies about entertainment that are great, and that's a great movie. Ed Wood is a great movie with George the Animal Steel, as a matter of fact. And The Player is the other one that I would really heavily recommend. You seen The Player?
I have seen.
Yeah, that's another classic.
And they aped a lot of stuff. There's a lot of homages in the shot selection in Boogie Nights from The Player. Like the beginning shot going through a lot of Warner Brothers.
Great tracking.
Is exactly. And other people have done it too, Scorsese. But the tracking shot into the club. Paul Thomas Anderson has said, "I took that from The Player." To show.
And by the way, in The Player, and if on the DVD they have the fuck up takes on there. It's a great. That New Line Platinum edition is a great one. If you remember correctly, Fred Ward's entire dialogue is about tracking shots in movies.
Yeah.
As they're taking people around. It's such a... That's Altman. And again, really, Paul Thomas Anderson is aping Altman probably almost as much as anybody else. With Boogie Nights, it's Nashville.
He said it's his favorite filmmaker. And he likes to tell stories in a similar sort of vein where it's not exactly linear and there's a bunch of different intertwining stories.
By the way, everyone in the room loves that you call Dirk Diggler Dolph Diggler. I just love that's the WWE genius of creative. What name can we rip off? Kenny Dykstra, Bam Neely.
So this book is your fourth memoir. How does it different than the other three?
Can I steal the line that got a nice pop on the Daily Show?
I was hoping you would.
Said, John, I asked myself whether this book whether the world really needed a fourth memoir, and now that I've seen the sales figure, the answer seems to be no. But it's been well reviewed by people outside of wrestling, like Publishers Weekly. Give it a good, not glowing, but they specifically mentioned that the parts that were not about wrestling were really moving.
Which has always been a through line of your work.
And that's something that's important to me. Like, and they specifically said, as far as the wrestling goes, Foley spends most of his time trying to convince himself he's as keyed up for this match as he is to meet singer-songwriter Tori Amos. When I saw that, I was like, oh, they can tell. But they did like it, and then Booklist really liked it. Said it succeeded on a number of levels, and I'm not really even convinced people to buy it at this point. You can't force people to buy something that they don't really want. But I think it's a good story. It's the first, really non-WWE mainstream book out
Did you look back at some of your stuff in your other books and tell it from a different light, seeing as you were on Umbrella?
It's similar to Hardcore Diaries, but I thought what was going to be different about it, going in, I didn't know how the story was going to work out. I knew that part of what worked for me for the Hardcore Diaries was that it was a disaster,
right?
And that watching the ship go down, my ship go down, was part of the thrill. And I looked at the ending of that book, where I proved that Vince was wrong, and we did have a hell of a match, and that Terry Funk was up to it one more time. And when I went into Vince's office and I went, Vince, he goes, yes, Mick, it was a good match. And I went, and he goes, I was wrong. And then I walked out, and he was like, he was on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And it was like that scene at the end of the Harrison Ford, The Great Adventure,
Indiana Jones?
Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
where they went through this amazing adventure, and you find out in the end,
they're going to stow it.
It's really part of a bigger, exactly.
And that's what it was like. It was like all these things are going through, and my story that meant so much to me was like just a blip on their radar.
Yeah.
So I knew that there was a good chance this story would be different, although it was told in a similar format. And then the stories that delve off, and I deal with the substance issues, and I deal with the wrestling deaths.
Yeah.
Those are things that I took weeks to think about and to write about. And so I'm happy with the book. All you can do is put out the best product you can. You go out there, you promote it. This was cool because I was donating the advance, which did turn out to be my there's not going to be any more proceeds. And it gave me a chance, for example, to talk about Rain on the Daily Show. And people were really willing to ask me about the Tori Amos chapter, and that gave me a way to nudge open that door to talking about rape and sexual abuse, things that you don't get a chance to
It's really neat
about.
for us because when we sat down with you 2 years ago, you were still excited about you going to go try to meet her as a fan. And I've heard you tell a story, and I know it's in the book, about going to meet her at Comic-Con. And it's cool to see how that has progressed to a relationship with her and a relationship with the charity.
It really was a great moment for me. And I think if you tie this into Boogie Nights, it's not a movie about porn.
No.
It's really not. It's a movie about people who happen to work in that industry.
That are going through something.
And the same way, someone, doesn't need to be a wrestling fan to get something from that chapter of meeting her, or be a chapter of hers to see that it's about how people can be inspired to do great things through unlikely sources.
We looked at one point very seriously about doing a movie about the territories, with the idea being that, like Boogie Nights, it has to appeal to people that couldn't give a shit, because otherwise it's too limited of a market. Frankly, had pretty interesting. Karazuski and Alexander, wrote Ed Wood, and People vs. Larry Flynt, very interested in doing this sort of stuff. And I think that that's essential, ultimately. And I want to look a little bit at, you hit on the fact that, this is your first non-WWE sort of overseen book. I want to look at the differences real quick in the publishing industry from when you started to now, because we talk about this a lot on our show. We deal with movie piracy and these things a lot. The models have changed so much from... This is Superfly tag teaming with him, right?
Brody,
because they had a pretty well-regarded tag team.
Yeah, they really did.
Was it All Japan? Is that Baba? Yeah. So we're nerds. It's we're going to end up giving.
Baba, though.
Is it not Akira Dawe?
Yeah, I think it's Taue. Or one of those older guys. I don't know. Taue might have been too young.
We're going to end up. I think we'll have to copy. I digitized my wrestling collection. We'll have to give him a copy of all the foreign stuff. But I think you go back to Have a Nice Day, and that was still in a period where particularly superstar memoirs could still be quite robust and do terrific numbers. And much like the music business is to movies, you're now seeing this with books and newspaper. Really, newspapers are kind of the canary in the coal mine for every other form. We see it in comics as well. How have you most noticed now? Because you've gone through this kind of in a weird way with. How many books total now? Because with the kids' books?
9 with the 3 kids' books.
Okay.
3 kids' books, a couple of novels, and the memoir.
So 9 That's books, impressive. Over a span. You have sort of gone out and promoted over the entire sort of slippery slope thing. What have you seen the most of it? Where do you see it going?
You know what? One of the stories I heard so frequently about Have a Nice Day was that there'd be these businessmen sitting in first class with a nice suit, and they'd come out with a briefcase, and they'd open up this wrestling book. And this is what I said about Samantha Bee's book, is that the highest compliment you give a book is it makes people look at you strange because you burst out laughing for no apparent reason. And that was the reaction that I was hearing about, was people were like busting out laughing in public places. The truth is now, only a fraction of those people are even likely to have the book.